I'm Dale, I'm an alcoholic. Dale. Yeah, it's actually quite awesome to be sitting here sharing today. I've never done a milestone share, or my first one, year one, was on Zoom because that was the period in which I went into recovery. It was during COVID. Year two, I shared in Durban North, and glad to be back home again for this year. Just a bit of an introduction as to where I came from. I suffered from a disease long before I actually knew that I suffered from this disease of alcoholism. And purely so because I was functioning in everything that I was doing as far as work was concerned. I was 2014, I was top technician in the country with a skills competition and went to Japan and then promoted to a manager from being a technician. And those were my heaviest drinking years, so I could not be an alcoholic if I was winning top tech in the country, if I was winning trips to Vietnam and Hong Kong. How could I have been an alcoholic? But my drinking continued. It was just like crazy because every accolade led to more drinking, an excuse to drink again and drink more. Got to a stage where I started having blackouts for the first time because I'd want to be the last person in the bar. And then the next day, my friends would show me photos that they'd taken of me sleeping or passed out on the chair. And that kind of worried me, and I went into that routine of I'm only going to drink beer in the week and all that bullshit that goes with it. Nonetheless, I had my son come live with me, and at that time he was caught up in addiction as well. So he was working there with me at my current workplace, and got to a point where the absence from work and the using started becoming a problem, and I got called in as a manager. And I realized then that I was doing wrong to the company because I was being a father and not a manager. I was not logging the days leave when he was absent from work. I was not reporting when he left work early and just didn't come back. Eventually got to a point where I was in the boardroom and called into a hearing. For that, the son got fired in that process. And I became, from having been in that country, in that company for 14 years, at a very high esteem. Everything was knocked down, and the trust has gone that I built up in all that time. And senior management was like, what you've done in this process has been wrong. And to me, I could only see the other side. I knew as a manager we were sending people for treatment when there were problems of addiction, but why wouldn't they do it for my son? And that was a big problem. And I developed a bit of a hatred towards the CEO at that point. And then the drinking progressed and went through Christmas parties and New Year's parties at work and having blackout drinking there. To a point where the CEO called me in and said to me, you're literally at a crossroads. And we're not here to fire you or give you a disciplinary hearing, but we want to know what's going on for you, what's wrong. And at that point, I had just won Service Manager of the Year, so I said, nothing wrong with me. But I think I'm drinking more because at that time it was the 27th anniversary of my brother's passing, who had died in a car accident where I was driving. And it was an excuse for me. So I said that because I genuinely at that point couldn't see a problem. Everyone around me was drinking. My friends were all drinking. And we would say how somebody else needed AA because they were terrible drunks. They never made it to work. They stayed absent. And being there at work 6 o'clock every day didn't make me less an alcoholic than anybody else. And they gave me I had to make a decision as to going to seek professional help to deal with my brother's death. And on the other hand, there was a treatment center. up the road, and I Googled it, and I read about it, and I said, okay, I want to go to the treatment center. And they were kind of like, okay, why your decision on the treatment center? And well, at that point, I'd sent my son to a rehab, and it was a 3-week stint or something. Came out and relapsed, and in one of our arguments, he said to me, but you should be going to AA, you're an alcoholic, why are you telling me what to do? And that stuck with me. And when I went into the treatment center, I thought it's like, okay, I'm just going to go clear my head. Give me a few weeks, I'll get back, and I'll go drink successfully. Because even in that meeting with the CEO, he said to me, you go away for these 3-4 weeks, for this month, and then when you come back, you and I can have a glass of wine together, we can discuss how we're planning the future and everything. And I thought, that sounds lekker. It was a plan. And got into the treatment center, and like it is, it's everybody there was on different levels and coming in, and I was like, okay, I only have 3 weeks because that's what medical aid had authorized. And so I was learning about the steps, so I joined the race to finish step work because that was something I stayed a bit longer at night because my goal was to reach step 3 before the 3 weeks and get to do my life story, because I said, if I tell my life story, I'll be fine. I'll be cured of this problem. And when I got to my life story, sure, I think the feedback that I got in my life story hit me so hard that I actually literally just wanted to go out there and drink, and I was back at that crossroad where they left me, and I was like, what do I do from here onwards? And fortunately, the counselor spoke to work, and they asked me, do I want to stay? And I said, I'll stay for another month. And they agreed, and the company paid. And that was where my journey started. It's when I started changing, because when I got to step 4, the reality of everything in my life started coming into play. And that for me became my safe haven. It was my safe space in my recovery. I've never felt more safe than those 3 months, because before the second month was over, I got a phone call from the CEO to check up how I'm doing and all of that, because at that point we weren't allowed visitors. It was during COVID. You weren't even allowed a weekend out after your step 5. So when he came, they allowed him to come see me, and when he came, I said to him, the first thing I said to him, I said, Shane, I don't think we're going to have that glass of wine. We're going to get out of here. It was a big joke for him, but it was actually where I had started realizing my reality. And when I completed the program, I learned so much. I learned so much from concerns groups. I got concerned for not concerning. I just thought that people that concern was snitches and nasty people, but just those are the people that healed me, that made me better. And I think of all the people that gave the worst feedback in my life story. When I read little passages that they wrote in my big book when I was leaving, they wrote the best stories. They wrote the best things about me, about growth in the treatment center, and that was surprising to me as to where I was. And when I left the treatment center, it was almost like leaving a safe space for me, going into the real world. And it was hard because I remember the day I left was the first snorkeling trip that we could go on that Stella had arranged because of COVID. Everything had stopped. No one was doing any trips. Nothing was happening. And from the snorkel, everybody went back up the hill, and I had to go back to my flat. I was dropped there with my suitcase and my bag, and then it was. And at that point, the CEO said to me, go home to my mom, who lives in Coxhead, and just go spend a week with her before you get back to reality. And that's where it was also very safe in that week, because there was no family or anything that was putting pressure on me. Everybody just thought that I had died of COVID in that point, because when I got into the treatment center, I went for my test, and that evening, about 11:30 that night, Daniel and him came in there with suits like they were from Mars or something. They were full head masks and everything. I was like, what's going on here? And like, we tested positive. They dropped me at the gate from my flat and they drove off. Sure. And there I was, thinking that I just made the best decision to go into treatment, and now I'm here and I'm COVID positive. So I went upstairs, I laid on my bed and I was thinking, okay, in what position should I lay to die? How are they going to find me? Do I leave a letter for my mother? What do I do? And the next day I phoned my brother first. He's a pastor, and I spoke to him and he said, okay, you do know that everybody that tests positive for COVID, not everybody dies. It's going to be okay. And I had to then phone the CEO, and all the rules and regulations then, the treatment center could not allow me back in there for 2 weeks. So for 2 weeks I had to sit at home. And I never touched alcohol because at that point I'd already made my mind up that that's it. I'm not going to do this thing anymore. But the anxiety in those 2 weeks that built up to get back into the treatment center was crazy. And when I came back from my mom's place and I'd done my holiday and started work, there were so many messages because the phones went when I got into the treatment center. For 3 months I was away and nobody knew what happened to me. And I had relationships with a lot of people prior to going to the treatment center. They had phoned work, they phoned Toyota head office, inquiring as to where I was. When I came back, it was like, oh, we thought you dead. What happened? How did you get right from the dead? And it was just madness. It was madness. And I think fortunate also in that the timing was so perfect that God allowed it to be so perfect because we were at 50% staff working and 50 weren't working. So my absence wasn't so badly missed. And I had to now start knowing my identity as a sober person, because in active I was driven by the 3 P's, which is power, petticoats, and pennies. That was my driving factor, and I loved women. I loved being in bars and seeing people there, and I'll just go chat up and it will develop and go into something. It will be crazy. The behavior is crazy. So trying to identify myself in sobriety was difficult. And in COVID, there was no meetings. We had to do Zoom meetings. And I went back to the bars, but not to drink, but because those were the only friends I knew. And I'd spend at least an hour, 2 hours with them, and then they would start with, like in every drunken episode, there's a repetition that comes in when they start with the stories, and then I'd have my escape plan and I'd leave. But I could go to bars and not have a desire to drink. Because coming out of treatment, that was, me as a superhero. I was that strong. And I dealt with a lot. It was my daughter's 21st, the very next month after treatment. Going through a family function of that magnitude without drinking was quite big. And I remember I'd done a Zoom meeting before we'd done the speeches for 21st, and everybody's calling me and looking for me, and the Zoom meeting's just not ending, and eventually went and done the speeches. But I needed that meeting. Somebody in a meeting shared a similar story of family functions, and it was like how God had just stepped in everything that I was doing. And then I started changing friends, and eventually started attending a church in Skopje. And that first year was difficult. My sponsor at that point was, all I wanted was to get sponsees. That was what recovery meant to me. Get sponsees, and I'll be a sponsor, and I'm going to do this thing. I'll be the Superman of recovery. And I never got sponsees. I was doing everything wrong. But what I had to do was go have meetings with all the friends that I had prior to Active and explain to them why I could not be in a friendship with them anymore, and how I had to abstain from relationships for a year. And that first year was just mad, because after about 7 months, behavior change came back. There was still no desire to drink, but the behavior was there. The behavior was back, and I was using the program to manipulate people, and I was easily manipulated by people. And I remember speaking to lady friends of mine, and I was telling them about the program, and every time I explained this program, they were like, wow, you're on such an amazing journey, I'm so proud of you. But I used it, because now I was getting all these compliments, they were making me feel good, and I was absorbing every minute of it, I was loving it. They had acknowledgement from them, and it just continued, and it got to a point where a friend of my daughter's was seeking recovery. And she got a sponsor, and the type of person she was, I don't think she obviously never had a clue what recovery was all about, because she thought giving up drinking is recovery, and she was still allowed to smoke weed. So that went south. It's from showing her what step work should look like and helping along, that ended up with us sleeping together. So that messed up that whole 1 year thing of not being in relationships or not having sexual relations. And it led to, I'd say the one time where I was in a mind of relapsing was probably that, when she went off to a treatment center, and I had to, with my pride, face everybody that was in recovery at the time. And it was hard. It was very hard for me, and I knew people were talking, and all I cared about was what people were saying, and it's that affected that power aspect in the 3 Ps. And it had to be a petticoat that was going to make me get into that situation. And so I went about 2 weeks without a sponsor, and it was just on willpower. And I just thank for the grace of God that willpower allowed me to stay that long. And I went to a meeting in Umhlanga. I thought, I'm no longer going to fellowship in Scotland. These people are full of shit. And I got to Umhlanga, and I was sharing, a friend of mine is in that meeting, so I was sharing in that meeting on my 1 year, I think it was at that time. And I also shared that I was going on a conference, and it would be my first one since being in sobriety, and how much drinking actually happens at those functions. I mean, everything is free. Why not? And then an elderly gentleman was sitting there, and he listened to my share. And after the meeting, he actually called me, and they do breakfast thing there in Umhlanga meeting on a Saturday. Went for breakfast, and he was chatting. So I had shared in my share, I had mentioned that I do not know how I am going to react when I get to that conference. And then he gave me such good ideas of what to say when people offer you the first drink. And he said something that worked for him all his life is, like he said, whenever somebody would offer him a drink, he would say, I'm not drinking today. And he'd ask why, and he would just say that it's my spiritual preference not to drink today. And he said nobody would ever argue with that, because the minute you put God in front of anything, people back off. So it worked for me, and it actually got me through all those functions that I had to attend. Amazing that. Because this is where I was now in I'd say my fear zone. I left the comfort zone of the treatment center and the recovery in the fellowship in Scotland, and went into a fear zone, because I was now thinking of relapsing. And about 3 months later of interacting with this guy all the time, and he's 34 years clean. He interviewed me to be his sponsee. And I thought, that's madness. How do you go sit in an interview to be a sponsee? But anyway, I sat there, and he said to me, I have a few requirements. My requirements are that I meet your family, I meet your children, I meet your friends. I want to go to your flat and see what it looks like, where you live, how you live. I want to meet your boss. And you need to read the chapter of the agnostic and give me a breakdown of what you think of it. And there I was like stumped, because chapter of the agnostic is the one chapter we never done at the treatment center. It was always just skipped. And my sponsor at that time, when I asked him about chapter of the agnostic, he's like, there are not many people that believe in God. Yeah, we're not going to do this chapter. Read it on your own, and you make of it what you think. And yeah, I'm getting this guy that I want as a sponsor, and he tells me, go do homework on chapter of the agnostic. And I'm like, wow. So I spent that whole Saturday night reading. And the Sunday I phoned him and I shared my views on it. And then he said, well done. I will be your sponsor moving forward. And he did all that. He got to meet my family, got to meet my kids as they came to meetings. They'll wait in the car and stuff. And we've been walking a journey ever since. And there's just been so much wisdom from him. And when I spoke to him about sponsees, he said, why would you even want to do that? You don't know what you do. You have no clue on how to guide people. You have no leadership skills in Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, you may be a leader at work, but you're shit, yeah. And I agreed with him, and he was right. And he said, you have to wait 5 years before you even consider a sponsor. He said, well, that does not mean that you cannot help people when they need help. He says, you can co-sponsor, that is fine. I didn't even know what co-sponsor meant at that time. He said, but if there's someone that needs help, bring it to my attention, we can deal with it together and we can see what we can do for them. So God was always just stepping in there. I also went into a relationship in my second year and ran it past him, and lo and behold, the person that he interviewed her. It's like just wild, it was weird. And she's from the church. She's very big in the fellowship, very active in the church. So I had no problems there with abstinence. So we ended up having a platonic relationship for a year, and that made me believe that anything was possible, that a relationship was possible without sex. Because to me, that did not exist. If you held my hand in a bar, that means we were going to have sex that night. So I learned a lot in that relationship over that year. And ending that relationship was basically December last year, my 50th birthday. I'd done my 50th dive at Sodwana. And she gave me a present, and there was a note which said, I have made a conscious decision to take our relationship to the next level. And she had a pack of condoms as one of the gifts in the thing, and I was like, I cannot. And that became the deal breaker. And I just was not ready, because I just saw relapse in front of me at that exact moment, and I abstained. That relationship lasted till January, and that ended. And then this carried on with recovery the way I know. And I thought maybe I'm going to have to wait for the 5 years that my sponsor spoke about. But then I got into this learning zone, and that learning zone is what taught me of having relationships with people, and they can be platonic, and that you can just take the values and learn from their values. Because at that point, I was learning how to deal with my children as well. It was difficult. And all different characters. I have a son that's an addict. I had a daughter that was in the experimental stage of smoking weed, went to varsity and excelled. And I could relate my successes in my career to her, to let her know that you may think that there's no problem because you're doing well in varsity. I mean, she got kept. About 3 months ago, I went to a graduation. It was such a proud moment for me. And she had stopped whatever she was doing, and she's doing an internship now. And every child had a different personality, character. And I was explaining to my son this morning, I said, it's such a blessing, because the two youngest ones have just entered being teenagers. And I said, I can be with them through their steps of teenagehood, because that's when addiction really gets to people. And in this learning phase, I can point it out to them and just encourage them and teach them what not to do. So learning was a lot to me. And the one thing that I had to do was listen to others. Like my sponsor is the kind of person, when I run something by him, geez, it's going to be a half an hour's phone call. He wouldn't just give me the solution and hang up the phone. No freaking hell, we had to talk for half an hour. And I also learned that, you meet people that you have something in common with, and share a lot of your fears and stuff and ideas. And I bounce a lot of my stuff off, because I know it's not going to go anywhere. It's something that we share. It's a bond we have, and you have a different bond with everybody in the fellowship. And we've been very close, and I've shared some secrets with him, and some things that I know my sponsor, being a business owner and what he does, he had absolutely no idea on how to deal with other aspects. And I think the biggest thing that I got in my learning zone was how to deal with death. And that was huge for me. My first cousin died, and he was also my best friend. And I was driving to Durban, and I phoned my sponsor, and I said to him, my best friend just died. I'm driving to go be with his mother and his brother. And he said to me that, I don't think you should be going there. And I was taken aback, because in my mind I was thinking, but that's the right thing to do, to go and sympathize and be there for them. And he simply explained it. He said, your friends, there's a gathering of angels that's happening right now. And that's where your cousin is. All you need to do now is acknowledge the time that you spent apart from him, how you've drifted away from him, and that's because he was inactive. He says there's a lot of triggers in going to sympathize with people that could lead you to drink. If you're strong enough, then he gave me an exit plan that day, and the advice was, stay for an hour, no longer, and go back home. Because I was already on my way, and I done that. And I left. And then I knew and understood that death is not about being absorbed in one's own grief and misery, and that you have to deal with death and make it about the other people that were still there, that were around, and assist in any way. And that you don't have to hang around to be there, because you'll be exposed to all of that. And in the emotional state that you're in, that you can become vulnerable enough to slip. And learning from that, I lost my brother last year in November, and by this time I now knew how to deal with death. It kind of, the learning zone has kind of brought me into a space where I put everything I've learned into a comfort zone. And I went and I done the eulogy at my brother's funeral. And when I got there, it was, I'd in this time in church, been doing quite a few programs, and I'd been learning quite a lot of stuff. And when I got there and I was doing the eulogy, I was sharing the grace gifts of God, and which is prophesying, 12-stepping as we call it, service, teaching, encouraging, giving generously, leadership diligently, and then mercy, and do it cheerfully. And when I shared that, every gift I shared on, I could relate how my brother had given me that in the time that he was alive. And he had considered himself the black sheep of the family. And yet there I was doing an eulogy and confessing everything that he'd done for me when I was in school and when I was growing up. And that story just became crystal clear. And so many people got a message in the church that day from just sharing gifts. And the gifts are the same gifts of recovery. They shared in the exact same way with the spiritual principles. And I help people. And people understood in the family that you don't have to drink to be able to go into leadership. And there was a course we done where you could measure the different skills and gifts, and it will rank it with questions asked. You answer the questions and will rank your gifts. And mine, right on top, there came leadership and all the others. And right at the bottom was giving, second to last, and last was the gift of serving. And then I changed that. I offered to become part of the service team in church, and I started service in different aspects in my workplace. I started operating the coffee machine for the guests, just a whole lot of things of being of service. I started sharing my journey with people. And then when I done that same survey 6 months later, giving and service had moved up, and the other gifts had kind of moved down. They hadn't moved down as in I'd lost points, because it scores you on the point system. But everything had moved up in those points remained the same, but service and mercy had moved up in points. So that to me was a start of a growth zone, and it was, by the grace of God that had happened, and allowed me to set new goals for myself, live my dreams, conquer objectives which I've set, and just every day I learned to deal with my children better than I had, because of indirect amends that I was making. I was doing things differently. I was interacting with them. My youngest daughter never spoke to him. She withdraws herself, and managed to get her to now be able to socialize with other children and other people, and grooming her in that regard. And knowing that there has to be a purpose in my journey of sobriety, and the importance of Alcoholics Anonymous to me, and knowing that I could balance religion and Alcoholics Anonymous in the same breath. The one thing that is in common is the gifts, and the spiritual gifts, and that became my purpose. Purpose that I created for myself, not something that, as it went along, people told me this is what you need to do. I discovered, created, and that was a specific area that I targeted, was just service. When I made coffee for people in a treatment center, it was a grudge thing. I'd done it because my counselor at the time told me I must make coffee, and it was like bullshit to me. I hated it. And then I learned that service had to be something that you do with joy. And just Father's Day came, and on my 3-year anniversary, my daughter sent me a message, and where I knew things were changing for me in the aspect of growth, she had sent me a message. And she said, she had initially sent a voice note and she deleted it. But I'd already listened to it, because in the voice note, she said that I was just a financial benefit as a father. I did not do anything for them and their person. I did not bond with them in any way. But I did make sure that they got through school. I did make sure that they had anything that they needed. But they did not have a dad. So being a father was just what I was, but I wasn't a daddy. So on the 17th, she sent me this message and said, I don't know what if I said yesterday about your 3-year anniversary was offensive. And I did not find it offensive, because I could see my part in everything she had shared. I genuinely never meant for it to be offensive, nor did I mean to belittle your celebration. I was just trying to point out how strong-willed you are, and that once you set your mind on something, there's no going back, no matter the challenges which came with it. I was trying to point out my faith in you, knowing that you will be the one on this sobriety journey until the end. There's no going back. I do know that you won't, because to fail is not in your nature. Coming from the life you come from and to who you are today, wow, what a beautiful journey of growth to look up to. I'm proud of you, Dad. Thank you for making the difficult decision in 2020, not just to be a better version of yourself, but I know it was the better for us as your kids. Thank you. I'm proud of you, and it feels weird to say that, because how can someone so small like me be proud of someone so big and powerful figure as you? Strange off the tongue for me, I must say. The very next day was Father's Day, and she sent me this message. Said, Happy Father's Day, Daddy. Thank you for being the father you are to me. I couldn't ask for a better base of support to fall on, for a figure to look up to. I woke up thinking of the poem we would get when we were in younger grades to give to you on Father's Day. The one who would say, walk a little slower, Dad. I am not falling after you, and your steps are still too big for me. Something along those lines, she says, as a kid, I never realized how big that poem actually is. I never sent it to you because you weren't my dad. As a kid, I never realized how deep that poem actually is to me. Though as I grow and continue to grow, I look up to you. Your slow pace and big pace steps, the one I don't see, and the steps that you leave in a big footprint. Those all relate to how you move in life, and thinking back until today, man, is your footsteps admirable. Thank you for leading the way, and not only that, you carried us through with you. You never left us behind. Instead, you continuously grow for the better of us. You grow our relationship with you to be fonder each year. In moments of mistakes, you correct us and guide us. In times of success, you celebrate with the purest joy. We have such a beautiful team. Thank you for being a true dad leader. Thank you for your genuine love and always being there. I love you. I appreciate you so much, Dad. Happy Father's Day, Daddy, my daddy. And she's 24 years old. And the first time I got a message like that from her. And all of that I got everybody in this room to thank for AA. And I know the importance of this program and why I have to stay in it. Yeah, so I'm going to leave it there. And thanks for letting me share.